Hey, welcome to Conversations with Ben Dixon, where we're looking at important issues and matters through a biblical lens with the hope to encourage you. And you can always download these episodes on Apple and Spotify. That's audio. And for video, you can go to YouTube or you can go to my Facebook page and just type in Ignite Global Ministries and look for Conversations with Ben Dixon. If you forget all of that, just go to conversationswithbendixon.com. All of the stuff, the links, everything you want to look at is there. Thank you for tuning in today. Great episode. It's going to be about the future of the church, and I have a special guest with me today. This is Pastor Dave Veach, and he is the Northwest Foursquare District Pastor of churches for about 3 or 4 states. I don't remember exactly. 5 states. And he's with me today because who better to talk about the future of the church than this man right here? Isn't that right?
Oh, nobody better. Right? Nobody.
Humility is our way. No, he's great. I'm just messing with him. But listen, we have been through so much over the last 2 years. You know this, I know this, and we want to talk about what that's looked like. We want to talk about where do we go from here, because the real question isn't about where we've come from, it's about where we're going, and we need to know that. And I thought, who better to talk about that with than Dave Veach, because he has the pulse on so many churches and pastors, has a heart for pastors to coach all of us, and I'm thankful he actually installed me here at Northwest Church, and so many of you that are watching know who he is, and so I know you're going to pay special attention to this because we want to know, Lord, where are we focused, where are we going, and how do we get there? So, Dave, thank you for joining me today.
My privilege. It's great to be with you. Great to see you. Great to be at Northwest Church. I love this place.
Northwest Church. Amen. Federal Way,
Washington.
If you don't know, now you know.
Right.
I want to ask just some preliminary questions. We want to break this up in a couple ways. So I want to talk about pre-pandemic, during pandemic, post-pandemic. We talked about this already. And so I just kind of want to start off our podcast by asking you some simple questions about pre-pandemic. And again, you oversee 200 and something churches.
Yeah, 205 right now. It's always a little flux based upon church planting and closing. Interesting statistic is that about 5% of churches were closing pre-pandemic, and church planting had kind of taken a backseat in our movement when I was starting this 12 years ago. And so we really pushed hard on church planting because you don't have to be a rocket scientist to understand that if you're closing 5% a year, it doesn't take very long till that's making a big impact on your organization's total numbers, to say nothing of your kingdom impact and your mission. And so churches, just like any other organization, have a general 20-year life expectancy where they will plateau and decline. And only in great churches where there's great transitions and great leaders do those declines pick back up. And so figuring out how to do that was really, really important to me pre-pandemic. And then just talking about the aging demographic. I'm a boomer. Most pastors today are boomers. All of a sudden, you have a wave of retirements and health issues and so on. And we have boomers that grab the ring and don't want to let go of it, unlike your predecessor, Steve, who just said, here you go, I'm done. And a lot
I'm moving to Arizona. Love you, Steve.
And just gone, just like that. He's just gone.
Yeah.
He's like, I'm not kidding. And he wasn't. And others are like, literally telling me things like, I will die in this pulpit. Wow. And the problem is that their church will too.
Wow.
Most often.
Well, now I want to dig into this, because I think before we talk about even how we've had to navigate the pandemic or the future of the church, which is where we'll land, you brought up a lot of great points in terms of pre-pandemic. What were you, as a district supervisor, as a coach to pastors, as an observer, up close and personal of many churches? I mean, you got to see small and big and medium size and rural and city and church plants and church closures. I mean, you have had quite a full perspective. What were you concerned about as it pertains to the church before we entered into the pandemic? What were the things that you were carrying in your heart most of all, things that you were concerned about that we're not doing and things that we need to be doing? What was the kind of the things that you would kick to the high place here?
Well, there's a lot of things that concern you when you are visiting with pastors, even pre-pandemic. And one of the biggest ones is the discipleship and the training up of young leaders and the releasing. most of us have spent our entire ministry learning to gather. We're gatherers. And so it's counterintuitive to be a sender. You've been a great sender. Our great young leaders have come right out of your direct discipleship. And yet anyone that tells you that as they've been sending, that a piece of them goes with that. And so as they send people, and even our best sending churches 20, 30 years ago kind of stopped because of the pain that is involved, the emotional pain in sending the people that you love somewhere else. But what that stopping does is it keeps the church from becoming what it needs to be. And so we're always trying to keep everything the same, and nothing stays the same. The only thing that's constant in life is change, right? And so that was a huge one. I think also just the state of the church as far as discipleship, as far as are we really making new disciples, or are we just keeping people in our seats, nickels and noses, or things that we should count. But discipleship is really a hard thing to count. And so how are we doing at making disciples? That was really a big one. I think, one of the things that's not a concern that everybody thinks should be concerned is particularly in our Pentecostal movement, is that, the seeker-sensitive thing is going to steal all of our good, passionate Bible people. And it's just not true, because that really died 10, if not 20 years ago.
Sure, yeah.
It really isn't even a factor today. There's a handful that still do that, but the majority, and particularly young leaders, are so far removed from that. They just know they can't survive with, a really nice seeker service. They survive on passion, and they have to be fully in. And so the followers in younger churches are like radical. So that was a concern that many had that I didn't have. But there's just a lot of things going on. And I think the biggest one that I spent a lot of time working on was the emotional health of a leader. What I found is that, we're basically insecure human beings, all of us. And then you throw leadership on top of it, of a volunteer organization where, sometimes when I was pastoring on Whidbey, I felt like my church was a house of cards. And if a strong wind came through, 4 or 5 families say, like, you're a terrible pastor, the whole thing could collapse. I would feel that from time to time. And I think all of us have those insecurities, whatever they are. And so trying to help pastors get to a place where they're in a healthy place emotionally. And most of us come to Christ out of brokenness. And when I came to Christ, it was celebrate all the great new things that God was doing. And yet I couldn't get healthy unless I looked backwards. And we don't really talk a lot about how to look backwards and deal with your stuff. And so I think that's been a real concern of mine. And we work real hard on making sure we're installing healthy pastors. And yet every one of us get knocked down several pegs on a regular basis. So that's a really hard thing to maintain.
So health in the leaders, right? Because obviously it doesn't take much for a church to fold when a leader falls.
Right.
And the criticism that, there's a season of compliments, but then the criticisms just come.
Yeah.
And we're all, don't you think we're all kind of looking at the negative these days? It just sort of seems like church has become kind of the whooping post for so many things. It doesn't mean the church doesn't have, I'm not suggesting that the church doesn't have any accountability whatsoever, because there are a lot of things we haven't done right. And, we've catered to or even been directly responsible for bad things. But I do also think that it's easy to criticize the church, and there are a lot of leaders who just feel under the weight and the pressure of needing to perform, needing to be amazing, needing to be a savior, needing to be Jesus, the best Bible teacher. And in the pandemic, not only have you had to be the greatest theologian, online commentator, podcaster, medical professional, epidemiologist, we just have almost had to have everything. And it's something you're going to fail, like inevitably you're just going to suck at something, or everything, it seems like. So there has been a lot of pressure. And I think coming into the pandemic, potentially with what you're saying, if the health of a leader wasn't something that they were moving towards, because we're not perfect, but and we have to be in process, if we're not moving towards healthy rhythms and healthy way of life with marriage and family and our time with God and even just our own heart, right? Then the pandemic's certainly going to expose that.
Yeah.
So we walked into this 16 months ago. We get an issue, a proclamation in March. We had been hearing about it for a couple months, and it is, basically we need to lower the curve. We need to shut things down.
Right.
I of course, for those few months, we shut down our church, and we went completely online. We didn't shut down, but we went completely online to figure that out. As we've walked through the pandemic, what have you seen in terms of like what's been healthy, what's been unhealthy, what's surprised you, what's shocked you? I mean, I don't even know where this is going to go. I just want it to go. Like, what have you seen? Because you've seen a lot of more than I have.
Yeah, it's well, we always say the pandemic changed everything, but the truth is the pandemic really didn't change anything. Those changes were already in process. They were just exponentiated. You've been online for how many years now? You've been
quite a few. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the average church. There's a great comedy that talks about how pastors would say online was the devil and terrible and not anything, and then there's this off ramp like. We're getting online now because like the governor just shut us down and we better figure out a way to do church tomorrow. Yeah. And so what's changed? I mean, like my wife went to the doctor the other day on Zoom. School is online. It's back part-time, not part-time. Everything has changed. I mean, giving was for some churches 70, 80% check. Anybody under 40 doesn't even know what a checkbook is, right? So like everything changed, and yet it really just fast forwarded changes that were already happening.
That's a great point.
People will say to me like, well, did the pandemic kill churches? Yes and no. Those churches that closed during the pandemic already had a pre-existing condition, much like those that are passing away because of the pandemic. They had issues that were not healthy, and churches that had issues that were not healthy were really exposed during the pandemic. So it's been a really difficult time just to figure out how to lead, but then throw into that social media mix as well when analytics and your algorithms are really determining what you're seeing. So if you have a bent towards masks or no masks, that's what's on your feed. And so if you have to make a decision on reopening with or without, whatever analytics the people are looking at, their algorithms are going to tell you you're 100% right or 100% wrong. Yep. And then they just get on social media and tell you how great of a leader you were or how terrible you were and how, Ichabod is upon my church because, my pastor said I have to or I can't. So, I mean, like, it's just kind of silly. And America in itself right now is just in such an awkward and odd place in that you can't say, the sky is blue without it becoming political. So if you say anything, it's divided right down the middle. Pick a subject. It doesn't matter. Right. And so pastors are still. I mean, I was on a phone yesterday with a pastor in a rural community where 3 families came and said, if you don't make your church mask, we're leaving. And others are like, you walk into them and I mean, it's all or it's none. Because I travel and am fully vaccinated, thankfully. I'm a vaccination fan personally. I've been in city churches and rural churches, and the difference is night and day. Rural, there is no pandemic in their minds, and there's like 3 to 5% masked up. City, it seems like it's 95%. And then pastors are just getting, pick a subject. Black Lives Matter. Well, that's a political statement. It's not a social justice statement and saying, hey, we have some issues to deal with in America. It's no, you're Black lives, I'm blue lives. And it's like, well, why would we even have to have that discussion? But yet it's fully alive in the church. And if you say anything about injustice, you say anything about things that are going on, you've just divided the room, just like that. And so we're experiencing all kinds of things that the church has never had to walk through. And it's really put a pressure on pastors. I'll give you an example. I've done 96 transitions in the 12 years that I've been the district supervisor full-time for these 5 states. In the last 15 months, I've done 30 of those 96.
That's a third.
Yeah.
Almost a third.
In 15 months.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Now, they didn't all just quit because of pandemic or injustice or I mean, there's a perfect storm, right? I mean, there was a bunch of boomers, there's health, there's all kinds of issues. But the point is, pastors are really having a difficult time. There's not a lot of people giving them kudos, going like, hey, I love you, you're amazing. I mean, when I had conflicts 12 years ago in the previous 20 pastoring on Whidbey, the conflicts would be about like I remember one time I removed the head usher because I thought he asked me to. The guy still hasn't gone back to church ever because I fired him as the head usher. Like I thought he asked me to. Like I'm just trying to do the best I can do. Those are the kind of conflicts we had to deal with. You know, the color of the carpet, liturgy. Do you sing 6 songs or 8 songs? You know, I'm like, those you're ruining my church because of those kinds of things. Today, the issues are so much more vehement. Yeah. I mean, they're just like. They're like angry issues, and they are like friend division. I do not talk to you. And cancel culture, you know, the church has really jumped on cancel culture and how bad it is, but the church is the worst at cancel culture. I mean, if you say black and I believe white, I'm done with you. You're out. Yeah. You're a bad leader. You're a bad man. Ichabod. God has left you, and those things are really stinging for pastors, you know. They're really stinging for that volunteer organization that you're building to try to reach people for Jesus. And all of a sudden, you're stuck having to reevaluate what's going on inside of you and why you made this decision, and was it the right decision, and was it wrong, and are these people really right, and what's wrong with me? And, you know, and then you go home and, you know, the dog is the only one that's your friend, you know? So, like, those are difficult things for a pastor to walk through.
your congregation that listens to you, you know, it's awesome. I'm sorry, I had a visual while you did that. It was powerful. Yeah, that's where I'm trying out my new sermons. Except I don't have a dog. So what do you do when you don't have a dog? You borrow someone else's. You just go out into the neighborhood.
I'd go to the beach. Preach at the beach.
I mean, everything you're saying, obviously, I resonate with because I live in it like you. And I think for me and Chris Manginelli talked about this last week. We just talked about how to have a healthy heart through all this. And I asked him, like, what were some of the hard things that you had to go through? And it was really just, he talked about relational pain. Yeah. I think for me, like, the internal conflict has been so great because sometimes, like, I have come up with a new term. I call it labelism. And it comes out of Matthew chapter 7. Jesus said, judge not lest you be judged. Same measure you use, it'll be measured back to you. Yeah. Anyways, the point of that is that I kind of started teaching that Jesus wasn't saying we can't judge behavior, because certainly we need to. We need to be able to distinguish between right and wrong and good and bad. But what he was saying is that there's the definitive nature of our judgment is for God alone. In other words, if I say you're a leftist, or you're a right-wing conservative. Today, practically speaking, those are the terms that I think we label people with so that we don't have to listen to you. Yeah. And the church is really good at that. They're really great. And manipulation. And that's some of the exposure of this season can be used for God to help us change and be converted into Christ-like people. And I've had to go through that personally because I'm not suggesting I'm exempt. But I think that when we just sort of think about the pandemic, and I've looked at other churches. I know for us, for example, we don't always know exactly where the church is at. Our church was about 1,800 average attendance. This is just people that came on a weekend. And then right now we're 850, 800, 850. We don't really know. And it can actually fluctuate, 100. We've even had 1 week to another 200 difference. And there's my children's pastor said that she has no way to, we don't even know how to plan. No. We don't even know how to plan because we don't know how many kids are going to be there, how many teachers we're going to need. And so we kind of plan for the larger extent, but we really have no clue. Even services, like we used to be able to like have a rhythm of 9 a.m. and 11:30 a.m. and our 5 p.m. We used to know about how many people. We have no normal now. We have no, like normal is not normal at all. So there's a lot that's changed and I have 12 less staff members. We've tried to do a good job of financial stewardship and frugality. We've had plenty of people leave. We've had lots of people come. And I've talked to a lot of pastors, and that's not all their story. Some of their story is things have just shrunk, and they have no idea what's going on. The political issues, the political polarization is so bad that even they'll say the same thing, but the way they handle the issue, like we can agree on the issue. Okay, this is what I believe, but then how we then deal with the issue is now the disagreement.
Right.
Like there's not a place for nuance. And I've pleaded with some people even during the season. I've said, be patient with me. Gosh, I'm 41. I'm not a millennial, but I'm just on the bottom end of an Xer. And so there's things I don't know. There's things I haven't led through, and even boomers haven't had to lead through. And I'm trying to get advice from people, and I'm trying to grapple with the issues and pray through and fast and seek God and get advice and all of that. It's been so much, so fast. And I would say that there's been a detriment. There's been things that are detrimental to the church that have deeply affected us and impacted us. But there's also been some great things that have happened. Yeah. Let me ask you about that. What have you seen, even if it's a clarifying moment, what have you seen that you feel like, man, this is really good? The pandemic, people dying, businesses being closed down. Okay, fine. All that's bad stuff. Yeah. But what have you seen for the church that you feel like that was really good? That's clarifying. That's really going to be helpful.
Yeah, that's been really, really exciting, actually, because when you look at what pressure does, it makes you stop and go, well, this is what's important. Mm-hmm. I was just talking to somebody, actually my son-in-law, Mark, who lost his mom just maybe a few weeks ago, maybe a month ago, but did the memorial service this weekend. And so he was talking about what's important. Who's going to come to my funeral? All of a sudden, so like wow, yeah. that's like, okay, what are really important to me? And churches have had to do the same thing. Right. What's really important? And churches that have taken this on as an opportunity are finding incredible fruit. I mean, just like people coming to Christ like crazy, new venues, podcasts, for example, online, for example. People are finding ways to do great ministry. You and I were talking earlier about Rick Warren's podcast where he talked about they started 1,500 new small groups this last year and baptized more than they've ever baptized. While other people are complaining that, we live in communism and we've been shuttered for 15, 16 months now. Well, it all depends on how you see the world. Do you see the world as Jesus giving you this opportunity to go reach people? Or do you see this as, this terrible thing that, the government is trying to do to you? Frankly, I don't think the government thinks much about us.
Not at all.
I don't think they care about us all that much. No. Until they get hundreds of complaints that, you're doing something wrong, then they come in and try to shut you down or whatever and fight with you. And I get that. But the bottom line is we're not thought a lot about right now in culture. We were what drove culture 100 years ago, for example. Today, pastors were one of the most respected people in America. Today, we're one of the least respected people.
Totally true.
So how do you deal with that? Well, if you're on mission, you're not trying to get respect from the city council. You're trying to reach people for Jesus. And when you have people that are on target and on track, that are discipled and out doing the stuff, they're just seeing tons and tons of opportunity. Christians run two battles, and we've run away from them. We've made it about political, just like the world's made everything political. And people that have made this about mission are just rocking as churches. They're doing amazing. So I think that is defining what's really important to people. And I think that, we talked about the online for a minute, and there's going to have to become new ways to do ministry. This book, The Agile Church, has really impacted me by Dwight Schizzle, or Zschheile. And he talks about how Dyson vacuum cleaners, Mr. Dyson, had 5,127, I think it was, prototypes before he hit on the one that is now on our Costco shelves that everybody's taking home with them. The church has I have one. The church has had the same prototype for 100 years, and now all of a sudden they're saying you can't do this prototype, and we're like, oh no, the government's horrible. Now I'm not pro what's going on in our state. Trust me, don't get me started. But I don't think that Jesus is waking up going like, oh no, our governor isn't going to let us gather. That's what we were called to do. We weren't called to gather. I mean, yeah, forsake not the assembling. Okay, I got that one. But we were also told to make disciples. How do you make disciples? Well, I don't know. We did a lot of nickels and noses and not a lot of discipleship making. How are you going to make disciples in a new culture? And the culture is different. It is changing. And trying to just do the same thing that we've done forever, what's the saying? I can't get it right now, but it basically talks about how insanity, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over, expecting different results. And we've been doing that. And so now all of a sudden we have to do some different things. So I think there are really amazing things that are going on. I see churches transitioning, and people will tell me this all the time. I knew it. God wants us all to go to simple churches, right? The mega church is over, right? The big church is done. You just gave your statistics, which are misleading in a sense because you've done this sort of thing and you have a ton of followers online. So ask a pastor how they're doing right now, and they'll just give you a blank stare. How's your church right now? And they're like, because we can't count what we used to count.
Yeah, no idea.
We have no idea. Yeah. You can count on...
I can tell you names. If I can tell you names, I can tell you how they're doing.
But what we've never been able to count is views, and we've never had people experimenting so much with these different prototypes like Dyson in doing discipleship making. You're making disciples online. You've been doing that for a decade or more. Most people are like, 15 months into this?
Right.
And they'll tell me, like, I can't do online church. I'm terrible. I watched my first one I did. I fired myself from ever preaching. I'm like, that is so bad. Why didn't somebody tell me it was that bad?
We just go robotish. I love you today.
Oh, it was awful. And so people, particularly in smaller churches, will say, well, I can't podcast because I can't make or I can't do online church even because I can't make it amazing. Right. And what you're finding is that people aren't looking for slick. They're looking for passion over polish right now, incredibly so. They're looking for the truth. The church has been able to make things look fake, and we need to make things look real because we're just being real and having a real conversation about how we're doing, what God's doing in our life, what's God doing in churches. So I see amazing things going on, but they're smaller. 15%, the stats are, of the churches are growing. 85% currently are in decline or plateaued. So talk about the state of a church or a pastor rather. Well, most of them are pastoring the 85%. And few of them, the 15%, are going like, let's take this hill. And so we need more Dyson types that are going to try anything and then change, try anything and then change, try anything and then change, and see if it makes more disciples, instead of talking about how terrible this is that, we've been locked out of our own churches. That's just, it's not an invalid perspective. It's just not a kingdom building perspective.
Right. I mean, I agree. I think if everything's an opportunity, it just depends on your mindset.
100%.
If we're missional, I think the people that are missionally minded are going to do what you're saying. They're going to take everything as an opportunity because our primary goal is to reach people.
Right.
Yes, we're going to gather, whether we gather smaller or larger or however we do that. But I started a series on the church. I called it the blueprint, the church that God is building, which is, it's not the church we're building. And so the point was, who are we? What do we do? How do we do it? And the how it can change. And that's the thing. We know who we are, according to Scripture, what we do. The mission's very, very clear. How we do it was the element or the component that we've got to continue to refine. That we have to be willing to change that. And the reason that I started that series, I think I did 8 weeks on it, it was just a handful of conversations to say, if we can't change and if we don't change and if we don't adapt, then the mission that we've been given by Jesus thousands of years ago will not successfully move from us to another generation. And that has to be a major goal for us.
Right.
Like, how do we put this into the hands of others that are going to take it farther and do better? We have to do a good job with what we have.
Right.
Change is normal. Like we said, nothing's constant except for change. I don't remember how you said it, but like change is a factor. It's a component. Like we've got to change a lot of stuff, not for change's sake, but things have to change. And so I've used this opportunity in the pandemic, I don't entirely see it as an opportunity, but we have to see the opportunities within it. The bad stuff to make the changes that need to be made. So one of the things as a pastor I looked for is what was dying, what is dying.
Yeah.
So don't resurrect what is dying. Just just bury it, put a memorial stone on it, remember it. That's awesome. We build on the past, but we don't worship the past.
Yeah.
The past is a beautiful thing, and we remember it just like our loved ones. We remember them, but they want us to continue to do life well and to continue to live life the way that we're supposed to. And I think that's what the whole past is. It's a witness for us to grow, and I've used it for that. So I've let things die, or I've had to put things down in order to see other things grow. And so the Lord gave me 2 words. I believe that it was the Lord in my mind, and I've shared this with the staff and some of the churches, that reduce and build. The word prune kind of sounds like just hack something off. I don't really like and it's a churchy word we've used. Who knows what it means? But the word reduce, let's just reduce down to the size that we are in person and then online, and let's reduce our ministry down to kind of where we are, and then start to build infrastructure, start to build out for the future.
Right.
How do we? Where are we going? How are we going to reach people today? I've learned, like you said, not only does the government, I don't even think they're that mindful of us.
No.
They don't care. I would actually I've said this, that a lot of people in our communities don't think about us.
No,
not until we mess with
all.
them. Not until when we went outside and did services. We did services outside. We got complaints. We had the cops come, and it was all great, And then what we did was we put together these $100 baskets of gift cards and everything else. We gave them to all the neighbors because we just wanted to say, hey, we have to do this. We love you. We'll try to only have the music starting at this time. We try to turn the decibel levels down, but we had hundreds of people for multiple services in our parking lot. So it was tough, and they still called the cops on us. God bless you if you're watching. I don't know if you ever watch or listen to us, but we love you. We do love you. You're our neighbor. We care about you. And we own 4 of the houses on that block right there. So there's a few of them we don't own. We don't know who called, but we gave all of them gift baskets for nonetheless. But most people aren't thinking about us. They're not thinking about the church. So we really do have an opportunity to open our eyes to the community and say, how can we get into the lives of people?
Yeah.
Sometimes right now, and I know this can sound controversial for some, depending on their mindset, but people are thinking, how do we get into places of influence in the culture and the community? And they're thinking that because they want to dominate it.
100%.
And that's sort of a little bit like, how do we turn this around? And sometimes that's out of fear, because we think that if we don't, we're never going to get back to who we are. I think part of the problem is that we don't know where we're supposed to go. If we're just trying to get back, and we need to get into these places of influence and position so that we can sort of recapture something. I guess my question is, are we really happy with the disciple making that we've been doing? The freedoms that we have in this country, I can go right down the street. Like, I've shared the gospel with several people at the coffee shop that I go to. I've invited several of them to church. 2 of them have come to our church. Nothing prohibits me or stands in my way from being a legitimate, Christ-centered witness to people that I just simply love and buy coffee from. Nothing has ever stopped me from that.
Right.
Not a mask, not anything. And I've been an advocate of that I'm not, whether you're a masker or a non-masker, I'm sort of agnostic when it comes to masks. There's
The
something
CDC said, and has a taping of this yesterday, you don't have to wear them if you're vaccinated.
Right.
What kind of mess is that going to turn us into?
Well, I'm actually going to talk to our church this weekend, so this will be a week later, but I'm going to talk to our church this weekend and just sort of set a precedent of just a 5-minute pitch and and it's going to be a mess.
It will 100%.
There
It's
was mass,
already a mess.
and now it's going to be vaccinations. And so, in my effort to not turn the church political, and also I don't want to not lead during this time.
Right.
I'm just going to state for the record: here's where we're at, and here's where we're going to step in. We're not going to make these things political because, like Rick Warren, I think even talked about that on his podcast, and I've come to really respect him. He just talked about the political spirit.
Yeah.
And I'm not interested. It doesn't mean politics don't matter. I'm just not interested in being led by a political spirit.
Right.
So let me ask you this: when we just move towards like the future of the church, because that's really what I'm consumed with.
Yeah.
I'm not sure about what I think about everything, but I certainly am trying things, and I know you've been an advocate of that.
Yeah.
You've said things like "go make a mess," and what
Yeah.
you're saying is like, "Go try, experiment, be the Dyson person."
Right.
We've just got to reach people. Keep that as the goal. I love that about you, and I think that I was out there in the crowd when you started saying it, you know,
Right.
and I just want to tell you, you're not only right, but like you're more right now than you were then, and that it sounds funny, but experimentation is a lost art in the church.
100%.
When we're locked into the mission, you know, we're always criticized. There's some of these watchdog ministries like criticizing everybody. It's like, oh, they're this and they're that, and they're that. Like, just if you could stop trying to watch everybody else's ministry and just go reach people, maybe we'd all be better too, you know. But I'm just curious, like when we think about the future of the church, what do you? I'm sure you've thought about this, prayed about this. What do you think? Like where you don't. Where are we going? Where do we need to go? What do we need to be focused on?
Well, it's still the make a mess, and it's still the mission. That's still, nothing changes really. But the problem has been that we have had that one prototype. And it's really not even true. We haven't had one prototype. We've thought we have. I remember starting this gig 12 years ago and starting to travel to all these churches and being totally mind blown that they hadn't got the same download from the Lord that I'd gotten on their liturgy, and they did things differently than I did. And I thought, everybody, we're all Foursquare, so I'm traveling in that circle. I'm expecting to see the same church, and you've traveled a lot. They're not.
No, not at all.
They think they are. We all think we're doing the same thing, but we're all doing it very differently based upon our own interpretation of how we would see the Father expressing his love to people. And that's not right or wrong, but it doesn't give for a lot of liberty to people to do things different. And Mark talks about when they come to Jesus and they said there was somebody casting demons out in your name. Right. We told him to stop it.
That's right.
And he's like, why? I have a friend that says, there's lots of ways to make chicken. Go make chicken. There's lots of ways to do church. And nobody cares how your neighbor eats chicken. You just don't even think about it. Like, are they eating it correctly? But church people want to know whether or not you're doing the right liturgy and the right size of a room, the right number of people, the number of songs, you know, are they Hillsong or Bethel? I mean, like, I don't know. Just people divide over the silliest things. And so the Dyson example is probably the best one. We need to try scores and scores and scores of different types of opportunities to witness, to worship, to make disciples, and then adjust. Try it and adjust it. And that's one of the beauties of podcasting and other electronic types of things is like, you don't have to put on your podcast, I'll see you next Sunday at 11. You know, you can drop one of these a week, one of a month. You could drop one every day. There's lots of ways to try to do this. And I was just listening to somebody the other day that's dropping a Devo every day. I think you did that during the beginning. I don't know if you're still doing that.
We're going to go back to once a week. Bible Foundations with Ben Dixon?
Yes.
Once a week, though.
But that's making disciples.
That's right. We did it we did it 5 days a week, then 3. Yeah, exactly.
Think about what people are consuming today. If you're an older adult, you're consuming hours of cable news.
Yeah.
Left or right, pick your side.
Yep.
Talk to them for 5 minutes so you know which one they're listening to.
I totally do.
Young people, you pick the age, they're on hours and hours of social media. They're not learning anything about the news. They don't care about the world. In fact, Mark Few, who attends a Foursquare Church in Spokane, they made the run into the NCAA tournament, made to the finals. And I remember some reporter asking this question, what does your team think about the 75-76 Indiana Hoosiers being the only team that the last team that have run the table undefeated and won the championship? And Mark looked at him and goes like, yeah, my kids aren't thinking about that. They're on social media.
Right.
So they're not reading the history of the NC2A. They're like, who did the funniest TikTok?
Right.
And they're going to play basketball.
Right.
And so young people are doing that. That's what they're filled with. Old people are filled with some sort of anger on the left or the right. And then they get 30 minutes of discipleship on Sunday. 2 times pre-pandemic, 2 times a month, mind you. So what are you filled with? You know what they're filled with. I don't have to ask you. So the future of the church is figuring out how to make disciples when news network and social media have already made much better and stronger disciples than we have. We've failed. They've done amazing. We have to figure out how to capture people, and the thing that you're doing, like the Ben Dixon Bible, whatever you're calling it. I mean, like those are attempts to do that. And people, we need to keep trying different ways to make disciples. I don't know what the future looks like, but I know it doesn't look like completely the past. And yet, when we gather, there's 2 things that we really are going to do, no matter how you change it. It's going to be worship and the word. If you're going to be making disciples. So those are the elements. What we get caught up into is, do you do your chicken barbecue or do you bake it? And those are dividing issues in the church today, and they ought not be. We ought to be celebrating. I was recently with a young leader, and I just come from visiting this large church plant in Florida, and this young person is doing a dinner church model, and they looked at me and they said, like, do people still go to churches like that? We get so wrapped up into how we do our chicken that we don't even think the rest of it exists. We're part of a larger body of Christ that does things all kinds of different ways, and we should celebrate, not be antagonistic about how somebody does it differently. And usually those things come out of insecurities. They come out of like, okay, you're going to judge me because I'm doing it differently than you are. Or they'll look at their social media numbers or whatever it is they're trying to do to reach people. Because let's face it, if you have a small dinner church model, you don't want to just have 12 people in your table forever. You want to reach people. You want to make more disciples. That's biblical. So we compare ourselves to others, and that's just what's so detrimental about anything human, is when we compare ourselves, which is social media. You can bash on that pretty easily for that, because we only put down, the pictures where we look great. If I post a picture of my wife, trust me, it has been cleared. Because I have done it when I haven't cleared it.
That's good advice right there, by the way. Somebody's getting delivered.
I have, right? Because I have done the opposite. I'm like, you look great. What are you talking about? I look terrible. You can't post that. I'm like, So we're only posting the good ones. And having real conversations like this, and we're not going to sit around and edit this all day. It's going to be just, this is what we're talking about.
No edit, no script.
Yeah.
And you know what's amazing is that with the future of the church, my predecessor, Pastor Steve Shell, he told me he believed that there was a place for the pulpit and the podium.
Yes.
The pulpit was for the word and the podium was for conversations.
Yeah.
And so I talked to him about that because I had this idea. I started these things in the church during our transition called Off the Record.
I remember that.
And the whole idea was we can ask anything. Everything's on the table. It's but there's no polish, there's no script, there's no nothing. Let's just talk. And that went, to be honest with you, I didn't get any what I would consider provocative questions, not until the pandemic. In the pandemic, what was interesting, the first membership class that I did, we signed on more members and we did more baptisms in 2020 than I can look back in records for some time. I mean, there probably were years back where there was more here, but I could easily see that there were just more baptisms and there was more members that were committed. So commitment was actually, 2020 was a year of reducing in commitment in my mind, at least in our ministry. But questions were being asked in the membership meeting like they had never been asked. I mean, people were not asking these questions. People were going to the membership meeting. They were looking at it. Do I agree? Do I not? Kind of. Now, I actually upfront tell people, hey, we have 2 classes to become members. This is not some elite club. We don't believe you have, this is some kind of thing for you to be special and other people aren't. But this is just every team has a roster. Every country has a census. We're just wanting to know who's committed.
Right.
And really the biggest issue for membership is, do you align with us? Do you agree with these statements? Do you agree with where we're going? We're trying to keep it close to the mission of Christ and our expression of that. But at the same time, we want people to ask questions. Hey, why do you say this? And why is this your value? And what do you do here? And it really has clarified simple things like that, which have been really good. So we've told people, I have up front said, come with your questions. I want you to ask questions. I want you to feel like there's a sense of alignment. I don't want you to 6 months later go, what does this church think? I don't want that, because that's not going to help the future of the church.
Does not at all.
So something that's helped me think about the future of the church is to make sure we clarify, not every detail, not every distinctive, but clarify the things that are going to matter so people do know their church. And I have noticed that there's a hunger from people to want to know things that maybe previously we were kind of assuming.
Right.
And that has kind of gone away. And I think that will be a healthy part of the future, is that people will, there's been a huge shuffling of the deck. Like, people have left this church and gone over to this church. And I personally think some people are going to wake up and go, I made a mistake.
Yeah.
Right? Because today's hero is tomorrow's goat. So
100%.
some people are using the pandemic in a way that isn't biblical church, but I don't sit around and judge that. But I think for a lot of us pastors who are just wanting to do service to the Bible and say, God, I just want to make disciples. I want to keep the mission going. The church might get reduced, but maybe it just gets reduced to mission. And that's just fine with me. I think when I'm looking at the future of the church, my hope is that we sort of let go of some of the preferential things that have been most important to us and take up the majority things that we have to do this.
Yeah.
We have to be okay with change we have to be okay with methodology shifting that we can reach, so that we can actually become not relevant in a hip sense, but relevant in a biblical sense to the people that we live around. I mean, if we're not even in their lives, nobody cares anyways.
Right.
Not to dominate them, but to liberate,
Right.
just like I was 22 years ago. What questions do you have for me? I've asked you a lot of questions. I didn't necessarily plan on doing this, but what questions do you have for me as a pastor as we think about the future of the church?
Yeah, I think as things are changing, making disciples, we've talked a lot about that and how you're doing it online and in the church. We talked a lot about what different styles of church are going to look like. But what's evangelism going to look like in the future? You do evangelism. Boomers were trained in a completely different manner. How do you do it?
Well, I've never felt effective at evangelism, so I think that's underlying it all, right? I mean, honestly, I've never felt like, man, I'm really good at this. But I can say I have a conviction, and so part of the way that I think, and I'm assuming that this, at least the way that I think is probably most important, because what you do is based on how you think. I don't have this mindset of like, let's just go out to the streets, I've been around people that do that walk up to people and they just say, hey, have you heard the good news? And they think like they missed something in the news because it's entirely negative. Right. And the person goes, no, what is it? And then they start going, well, Jesus came, died, rose again. And then they sort of bait switch that person. And again, like, methodology aside, like, gosh, do whatever works, it doesn't work for me. Right. But what I think is that I get my hair cut at Sports Clip. Shout out to you. I get my coffee at Starbucks. Love you guys. I go to Costco. I go to Fred Meyer's. I go to Safeway. So my goal is to talk to the people that I'm around all the time, get to know them, know their name. Do they have a family? What are their likes, their dislikes? Kind of have fun with them, build a relationship, build a rapport. Questions get asked in that context, and it always comes up. The Lord always comes up. My testimony always comes up. I had the privilege of raising my wife's children. They're my stepkids. That always comes up because we live in a world of a lot of divorces and blended families. Yeah. And so my life becomes sort of an open book where not a lot of people are open. People aren't like, hey, let me share all my story. But once they do start opening up, they'll share their problems. They'll share their pain. And in that, you can not just shine a light on all your victories. I share my pain with people. So my underlying conviction is to try to bridge conversations to people that I see all the time or regularly. So that's the way that I do it. So evangelism, to me, the goal is to eventually share the gospel and what that means to me. one of the things I like to do pre-pandemic, and I'm going to do this now because I've got a few people on my radar, is to actually go out to lunch with people, and during that time share with them my testimony and the gospel. That's really what I did. But to build up to that it takes quite a bit. It takes quite a bit of rapport. So I've always told people, go to the same places, build relationships with people, remember their names, learn their families' names and what's going on in their life if they're going to school. But I think sometimes Christians, we can be socially inept and we live in bubbles and we're not really that interested in getting to know people. People are inconveniences rather than targets for God's love. So I honestly, this is my mindset. This is what Bridget and I teach our kids. This is what I talk to our church about. So evangelism is simple, it's relational, it's practical, and then sometimes it's just Spirit-led. Like the Holy Spirit will give me a word. That doesn't happen all the time.
Right.
But when it does, I'm very open and available to it. But the rest of the time, I just have conversations with people all the time. And when you insert yourself into somebody else's life, anything can happen. I think the reason we don't do evangelism is because we don't insert ourselves into anybody's life at any point. Yeah. And that's probably one of the greatest setbacks is if we live in a bubble, if we sort of are tribalistic, and we're spending too much time inside or doing our programs and routines, and we're not interested in getting out and getting to know our neighbors and neighborhoods and all that stuff, then obviously you just won't have the opportunities. If you don't have an opportunity, you won't have a conversation. So to me, it's opportunities, conversation, and then sharing of the gospel.
So Barna would say in his research that only 34% of us evangelical Christians can have a relationship without being judgmental of that person's quote-unquote sin. So being a boomer myself, you're not. When I became a Christian, we ran around with the 4 spiritual laws and things like that, the thief in the night, the cross and the switchblade, the late great planet Earth. And they were all questions on, if you died today, where are you going to be? And what's going to take care of the sin in your life? Sin implies that there's something wrong with you. Most Americans wouldn't identify with sin. They wouldn't identify with heaven or hell. And they're being judged by the majority of us who are trying to do evangelism. And so one of the things I think is going to happen in the future is we have to begin to understand that there are broken people out there that want to have a relationship with God. And it's not going to be based upon whether or not you can scare the H-E-double hockey stick, my mom used to always say, out of them. It's based upon whether or not they believe and you present to them a God that cares about their pain and would love them right where they are. And so I think that flipping the script on evangelism for the next generation, and it has to do with relationship and brokenness as opposed to heaven and hell and, who's on the seat of your life right now. So I think that as the church, and if you look at large church, small church, those are the controversies within, like, which is really God doing today? Well, he's doing both, in my opinion. But what the people in the smaller dinner-type churches are revolting against is the relational side. They say there's no relationship in a large church. Well, you pastor one, and so if there's anything you're working constantly on, it's the relational side, right? Because that's where discipleship happens. So we understand that. And yet what's happening in these smaller dinner-type churches is that they're really getting into relationship with broken people that are full of sin, according to a boomer mindset, and finding out that there's people and God that loves them. And so as that begins to change the way we look at church, I think that evangelism will take off in a completely different manner, which you've been doing just naturally because you're not a boomer. And I think that the church will begin to make disciples out of people that are really far from God, not just because we scared them into eternity, which is what the goal was in the 70s. I mean, we were literally trying to scare them that they might die, be hit by a car. I mean, that's what we asked them. We could get hit by a car today. Where are you going to be? And they're like, I'm not going to heaven. I'm a bad person. I'm going to hell. I know I'd end up in hell. Well, you better pray this prayer. Okay, I'll pray the prayer. I might just go to jail every Sunday, not just to do ministry.
Glad you're out. We're glad you're out.
Every Sunday. And it was easy to do ministry with those people in the 70s because they're like, I'm a bad person. That's why I'm stuck back here.
Right.
Yes, I'll pray the prayer. I mean, they would all pray the prayer because they didn't want to go to hell.
Yeah.
Most people today don't believe in a heaven and a hell. Their worldview is so different.
Yeah.
So what is it that we're giving them?
Yeah.
Well, we're giving them peace that passes all understanding. That's what I went after. I went after peace. I used to get that in a joint. Now I got it, just by going to God. And so I think that evangelism and discipleship, you can't just say they're one or the other. You can't do discipleship without it being evangelism. But today, we're not doing well with discipleship, and we're not making disciples that lead new people to the Lord. So as we adjust that with large and small places of worship, we're going to see disciples be made all around the world. And let's not forget that America isn't the only part of the church. The church is thriving in South America. The church is thriving in parts of Africa. The church is amazing. Where is it not doing well? Europe, other than immigration. Where is it not doing well? America, other than immigrants. And so I think if we were to concentrate upon those people groups as well, we would find amazing fruit.
I agree. I think it's interesting you brought up evangelism because I think the church has known this. I mean, gosh, I've been in seminars and conferences, and we've been talking about evangelism, forever and discipleship. But the reality is COVID expedited our need to not only know this, but do this, right? We have to be practitioners in this season because really you get stripped down to what you are, not just what you think or the theoretical conversations. We can have these conversations, and we have had them for years. I've been around and heard them and had some of them. But now it's kind of like, what's the substance of your ministry? And I think it's a good time for churches and leaders and really anybody that's a Christian to just to evaluate, am I part of the mission? One of the things that was interesting, which I've heard as a pastor, is like, you don't do very many altar calls. I think that statement reveals something to me. It reveals that a lot of the way we think people come to Christ is they walk into the church on a Sunday, and if they don't hear that call of salvation at the end of a sermon, then we're going to let them walk out of the doors and not be saved. I think that's really the presupposition that sort of is the foundation for a person saying you don't do a lot of altar calls is potentially also part of the problem is that we're not meeting those people. We're not having discernment in the services for them, and we're not meeting them in our neighborhoods and sports clips and Starbucks and all that. It's an interesting thought. I think I'm kind of messed up by Spurgeon. I read about Charles Spurgeon, how he would preach and he would never do an altar call. Yeah. And then he
pretty good guy to be messed up by.
Yeah, and he would say to people at the end of his message, he would say, if you really want to be born again, then meet me here. My office is here at 12 p.m. And they would say, some of the books that I've read would say there was a line around the block at 12 p.m. the next day because he always wanted to be sure that somebody was making not an emotional decision, but a real sacrificial decision to follow Jesus. Yeah. His job was to explain it and not just to like compulsively get somebody to make this decision. So he wanted them to sleep on it, right or wrong. But my point is that when you bring up evangelism and the future of the church, I think there are a lot of things we've been saying for a long time that now we just need to have boots on the ground. We really need to get out into the community. We really need to be in conversations with people. And I want to say something really encouraging. A lot of the times, like I had the privilege of leading somebody to the Lord the other night. What was amazing is that when you disciple one person, it's kind of like the woman at the well. Here's this person nobody else is going to talk to. She's out at the well in a time that she knew nobody else would interact with her. Jesus encounters her. She has this incredible thing happen with her and Jesus, and she obviously becomes a believer that he's the Messiah, goes back to Samaria and becomes the greatest evangelist Samaria's ever seen, minus Philip, who comes later. But what's amazing is that you just never know who that one person is that you're going to disciple that's going to be the accelerant of evangelism to touch a whole neighborhood or a city or a school. And I've watched that over the years, and it's made me think a lot in this season. Like, there's a couple people in our church that have been walking the road of discipleship, and they have been the greatest evangelistic people because
100%.
they have no issues with talking with anybody. They don't have any religious baggage.
Right.
And so for them, it's all about sharing testimony. And so I just think this is what discipleship, again, produces or reproduces, is that sometimes we're not going to be the best or the most proficient or efficient at something. We still want to try. We still want to be out there sharing with people how we can, when we can, But man, there are these people around us that if we would just disciple them, they are going to be the woman at the well types who will do what we can't do. So I think evangelism and discipleship, really honing down and getting this, whatever way we do it, but really getting this right, is the future of the church.
Let me piggyback on that as well, because you're talking about the relational side, which I 100% believer in, and I think that's where boomers have, it's like we've been lost because we're supposed to scare the hell out of them, and they don't even believe that. So, but I think another thing to understand, particularly for pastors out there that are leading churches, is you're doing evangelism every time you speak. If you put it out into the airwaves, you don't know who's going to click on you and who's going to listen to this and who could potentially make a decision. I heard one person say pre-pandemic that people would watch their church services for up to a year before they'd ever walk into the church. So people are making their determination whether to ever come visit you based upon their experience with you online and whether or not they resonate, whether they think you're real, whether they think you're honest, whether they think you're trying to just sell them something and you're fake. So people are responding that way. So that's your new fellowship hall. That's your new foyer is online.
That's a great way to put it.
And I think that we also have to understand that younger adults aren't looking at church the same way we do. We talk about church being a family. Come join the family. And so if they trip in one day and they raise their hand or however you do that, we think, boom, they're part of the family. And what they see is totally different than that. We see it as life and death, family or not. They see it as a self-help tool. It's like going to a yoga class. It's like going to a restaurant. You like Duke's. You go to Duke's every now and then. Duke's is one of our favorites. Shout out to Duke's. The chowder's the best, original preferably. But that doesn't mean I'm going to go back there the next Tuesday night or the next Tuesday night or the next Tuesday night. And so how we see church is you came once, you made this decision, you're going to be part of the family, you're going to show up every Sunday. Not necessarily. I don't go back to Duke's every week. And so we have to understand that we're starting from not just zero, we're starting from minus and having to teach them why being part of the family is helpful, why joining and being in community is important. I think community is the greatest asset the church doesn't spend a lot of time talking about. People are lonelier than ever. I have a visual right now in my mind of driving down the street and going to this corner and seeing this girl standing in her window just staring out. It was a kid, probably 13 years old. And I'm thinking it's got to be a really terrible time for her to sit in her living room 24/7, not go to school, not be in sports, not have to be able to talk to grandma and grandpa. I mean, kids want to go. And adults want to be part of something. We want to have relationship. As guys, we'll say we don't, but we really do. So what is it that we're going to do to capture that? And people will bag on how do you do chicken, like Zoom church is bad, and you can't have real community. Don't judge their chicken. It's okay. Why do you care? If they're building community online and the people are across the world, it's better than what they were getting before. It might not be the best, but that's subject to your personal opinion. I think in person is way better, but you know what? This is going to work for some people. Or at least if it begins to work, it'll be the opening, the foyer type thing where they're coming into the church through online type thing. So I think the future of the church is bright. I think it's just going to be so different that it's going to be disorienting to a lot of people. It's going to be disorienting because they're not going to do the songs that they like. They're not going to do them in the order they like. They're not going to do the altar calls that some people want. It's just going to be different, and we don't do different well. We all say that change is normal. Just don't change anything in my world. And so people are going to have to understand the mission is more important than their comfort.
Yeah, that's right. No, I mean, and I'm living in change. So for us, I think it was really a blessing when we transitioned down here almost 2 years ago, Bridget and I and our family.
Yeah.
We were plucked out of everything we knew for years. And then, there's some things we know and
Right.
they're not changed. We love Jesus. We love the Bible. We minister. But everything else is different, environmentally, people, all that. And I think that set me up to also try to potentially lead well the changes that were necessary. Now,
Right.
seeing that, you and I would have never known this, but 7-8 months before the pandemic, here
Right.
I am getting installed after Pastor Steve and Mary. It's amazing. And so we've changed the church a lot. And
Yeah.
and a lot of it, honestly, and I've told people this, it really wasn't because I was a strategist or great or at anything. A lot of it was needs. Like we had to do
You
this.
had to change.
And it's not even just about I understand some people just want to survive right now, but I think we all really want to thrive.
Yeah.
We want to see the glory of God. We want to see people come to Christ. We want to see people change. One thing that I'll say in closing is, I said this 5 years ago, and I don't even think I knew what I meant. Now I'm starting to get it because I think I said it in a way that I wouldn't have understood in today's world. But I thought to myself, as we talk about evangelism and discipleship and the future of the church, that churches that figure out how to help people walk into freedom
Yep.
are going to be cutting edge.
Yep.
Right? I mean, I don't care. We're not really hypey, and I don't know if that's really my focus of good, bad. Some people are more excited, and passion's important. I think intimacy with God, passion is really, I love that. But I do think no matter how you do a gathering, helping people find freedom with the amount of anxiety that we have
Yep.
today, the real fear that we're facing, the fear of death, the fear of the unknown, even just the social anxiety.
Yep.
That's why for some people, Zoom is a good thing because they, for whatever reason, they can't do
Right.
together. I mean, we just have to have a lot of grace and compassion, and at the same time realize that we're helping each other find the freedom that Jesus offers, one step at a time. And churches that really see being whole in Christ, being new in Christ, and connecting with one another so that we can grow to be more like Him. If we really begin to be about that more and more, it is appealing to a world that is just so bound.
Yeah.
Before I was a Christian, I was so bound. I mean, it was more bound than I realized. And people today, even more so, with just the lies and social media and all the stuff that is burdening us. And I feel like we need to have a vision. Like Jesus saw the crowds and He had compassion on them.
Yeah.
We need to see people just like Jesus sees us. I'm not saying I'm better than anyone, but we have to see people and have compassion and meet people where they are. And so that fuels my evangelism. And I pray that also will fuel our vision for the future of the church. Well, hey, Dave, we're going to have you back.
Love to.
And when we have you back, we're going to have a new title for you, coach, consultant. I want you to bring up that title. It's going to be great.
Yeah, I'm going to start a business, and I'm going to call it Dumb and Dumber Coaching and Consulting. Does it work?
It's awesome.
What do you think?
Anyways, hey, thanks for being with us. God bless you. Thank you for tuning in, and I look forward to being with you next week on Conversations with Ben Dixon.